All right. All right. We are live. Welcome everybody. And as usual, I'm just going to do a quick something in chat here. And just guys out there, gals, if you could just let me know we're coming through, audio, visual, everything good. Happy, Easter Monday to you as well, Lisa Mitchell. Good to see you out there. There's a touch of a delay, so I'm just going to keep an eye out here for chat, make sure we're A-okay to go. Garrett, few announcements today. They're only going to take up about, maybe 4 or 5 minutes, maybe 10, because I know it's your favorite part when I do that. No, but I do want to ask you a little bit about what you just mentioned offline, because I think that's really cool. I do want to ask you about Peer, because you get together once a quarter with hundreds and 600-700 now. I forget how many.
Yeah, well, in North America last week in Orlando, that cohort was about 500 MSPs, but we have nearly 1,000 worldwide and virtual now.
Okay, so we're going to come to that in a minute. The first thing I do want to kind of get out there to everybody. Actually, I'll hold off on this because people are coming in. But Garrett, maybe you can bring us up to speed a little bit. Every quarter, I like to ask you pulse of the industry. We just got done with Q1. We're into Q2. Can you give us kind of a lay of the land of the pulse and what you're seeing?
Yeah, so I mean, first quarter across, our aggregate was strong with like average growth rate of growing MRR by annualized by between 18 and 20%. So, I think that's really good. But we did spend a lot of the meeting, talking about, preparing for potentially. We don't know what's going to happen with the economy. But at this point, I think there's enough data that we need to start preparing. Like, what are the things we do in order to, protect our business, have a plan, and thrive? And it's my strong feeling that these are the times when there's like, once we get to, it's not a matter of if, but when we have an economic setback. As you know, Andrew, I predicted 8 of the last 4 recessions. But it's really kind of sorts out all businesses, but MSPs are no different. And so how do you think about like how efficiently you're running your business, what your ability to add new logos look like? Are you above like your turning point or your break even? If not, what's your cash position, staying on top of AR? Like there's so many things to do to make sure that you have options that other people don't, to take advantage of what for some people will be the worst thing that ever happened in their business.
Mm-hmm. I remember distinctly, Gary, 2 periods. And one I worked kind of tangentially with you, and that was the 2008, crisis, and how people, what they did and how they approached it. And then obviously the pandemic. And we also had 2016 a little bit in there, these quote unquote downturns. And it's just really interesting being prepared and how you approached customers and your advice to MSPs. It's something you definitely should prepare for. Maybe a CyberCall episode if you're open to it.
Yeah. I mean, we have a lot of people that are listening today that, other than the pandemic, right, which is different than other kind of downturns and bounce backs, they've never experienced it. Like they weren't in business like in 2008. It's been a long time, right? Since we're like overdue. And so some people, if you've not experienced it, you may not know how to get prepared.
Yeah. We'll do it. We'll do that. And maybe a good segue. I just want to show something to everybody. And I'd love for you to all share this. We're going to do a big marketing campaign around it because I think it's significant. Can you guys see my screen? This piece here. Mm-hmm. Is that coming through the fifth year anniversary?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So Gar, you're the sole holdout, and I thank you for it. You're the original. But we're going to bring the band back together. May 19th, we'll hit, we're going to hit 5 years of the CyberCall, and, far north of 200 Mondays of education from business and the business of cyber, et cetera. And we're going to be looking at, the past, present, and future. 2020, when we were just coming out of the pandemic and we started this because everything was virtual. And I just want to, really, first off, thank you, Gary, for spending those 5 years with us and helping educate, and then bringing back Wes and Kyle, the originals. Yeah. So
I didn't realize it. I would have asked for a raise. Andrew, what would be like 30% raise on 0?
Mr. Blutarski. Yeah. So I'm not sure what happened here, but I have everybody this way now. Let me see if I can get back my screen, but I'll figure that out anyway. But yeah, I think it's pretty cool, Gary, that it's far north of 10,000 MSPs that we've educated in that time frame, and so we're like I said, we're going to do a big show, quote unquote, with that, and I'm excited to have everybody back and talk about what's transpired over these 5 years. So okay, let's get on into today. First off, I made a mistake. I had Phyllis let me know that. I said it was the NVD. It was actually support of CVE. And Phyllis, can you kind of they go in tangentially to one another. Can you kind of help everybody understand the funding? Because obviously you need CVEs to update the NVD, but can you kind of educate with the funding, if you will, for everybody?
Yeah, sure. So as we all know, CVEs are the common vulnerability enumeration, right? So that's the CVE numbers that we get. And that is funded through CISA and MITRE, an FFRDC, Federally Funded Research Development Center, are the ones that are the keepers of CVEs. NVD, the National Vulnerability Database, which is based off CVEs. In order to make it to the NVD, you have to have a CVE. And that's managed and paid for by NIST. So NIST does that internally. So the NVD will include the CVE. It'll have the CVSS, the severity score. It'll put more context around the CVE. Like, these are the versions of the different software that's vulnerable. It'll point to advisories. It may give some remediation steps, so on and so forth. Now, the two are separate. However, as we all know, every agency is getting funding cuts. And so it could be that NVD does get defunded. Year over year, less and less funding does get allocated towards NVD, meaning resources, because year over year, NIST does get funding. Just like everyone gets in a recession, federal government does as well, right? So, more to come. It'll be interesting to see what happens to CVE and NVD as a result of the NVD defunding. Just, an NVD found, not NVD, sorry, I'm now confusing, the CVE losing funding. There was quickly formed a CVE foundation. And so folks in the community are concerned and looking at, is it really a good model to have federal government fund CVEs? Or should we be moving to something different?
Yeah, it's really interesting, and that's the area. By the way, Bob, you're going to ask.
Do we really need CVEs?
Well, pretty much every tool that everybody, is relying on it. And then some people have brought in what Europe is doing, so it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, so it's interesting this week. And I'm going to introduce our guest shortly, right?
Wait, Andrew, do you know who got more funding based on this? Nation state bad actors.
Yeah, that's really.
They just got 20% more funding. They can pin their ears back.
Yeah,
I'm glad you said it, Gary.
Yeah,
it needed to be said.
Yeah, it's real. That's a really interesting way of looking at it, Gary. But you're right. So I thought it was serendipitous. Or ironic that our guest today, Dre, we're going to be talking about the CentreStack vulnerability that the folk like John Hammond initially, and the team there at Huntress uncovered. And this is an MSP centric tool that is used not solely right by MSPs, but I thought it was interesting that here we have a very critical high severity CVE come out. And, that same week, we're like, are we even going to have the ability to do anything with CVE, or is it dead in the water? So I thought the two kind of coming together this week could offer an important cyber call for us to talk about these things. And, Bob, you always have really awesome ways that you articulate things. So I think it's going to be interesting for us to talk about, like, so what happens if it wasn't funded, or if one day it isn't funded? Is the commercial sector going to step up? And these are the things I want to talk about, in the latter half of the call. But Dre, you've been patient, and it's good to have you for a first time. It's always awesome to have new people on the cyber call. So tell us a little about yourself, welcome, and what you do at Huntress.
Yeah, so I'm one of Huntress's talkers. I just talk nonstop, so they always send me to talk. I'm Dre. I'm based in the UK and Ireland, if you couldn't tell. I'm one of the senior SOC managers, and we get to just do an awesome job at Huntress. As one of the MDRs, we kind of get to bridge the threat research, the proactive and the reactive sort of detections, and then get that over into actionable insights, whether that's for folks who pay for Huntress or folks that don't. We just want to give as much away as we can for MSPs, for just anyone in the community. I take a personal passion in that, by the way, because I believe cybersecurity shouldn't be paid to play. You shouldn't have to have a huge budget to be able to be cyber secure. I got a background in IT, networking, pen testing, incident response, but it's at Huntress I've really found my place at doing the thing that I love, security, but keeping the community safe. And we were just talking, Andrew, if I'm not working with computers, you're going to catch me just hanging out with my dog in the forest and a million miles away from any technology.
That's awesome. Thanks, Dre. Thanks for coming and joining us. Gar, I'm going to hand it to you, and we'll get on into this one. So thanks.
Yeah.
And good to see you back, Gar.
Yeah, good to be back. So Andrew or Dre, can we just talk a little about CentreStack for people who are not familiar with it and what the scope of it is, like how large it is?
Yeah.
The actual company, if you can give an update on that, and then we can jump into this.
Yeah. Dre, do you mind kind of taking it away?
Yeah, man. So as I understand it, they're essentially a file syncing solution, which is huge, right? Because you need to have asynchronous filing. But we've seen it again and again and again where file sharing solutions seem to be the initial access and entry point for adversaries. And I also believe CentreStack has overlap with some other tools, which we see again with file sharing solutions. So I'm not too familiar on CentreStack as a company, what their statements are on all of this. I think we've tried to get in contact, and I think communications are happening behind the scenes. But this won't be the only file sharing solution. They're not unique in this, by the way. It's not like a huge corporate lapse in security, arguably.
And to that point, Dre, I just want to ask you and your opinion on this. So we had to move it, right? We know threat actors are looking at these. Can you give us, from your insights as a security analyst, what is it about these that are so intriguing? Why are they focused on these? Is it because it's, hey, the obvious, Andrew, it's data, it's files, or is there something more to it?
Yeah, man. So I think on the surface of it, it seems like adversaries would want to go after file sharing solutions because they are where the files are shared. And I think an aspect of that is true, but I think what's worth making more salient is there are IT tools that aren't there for security purposes, they're there for business purposes. Often these file sharing solutions, they want to have a frictionless experience for a user who's just trying to get a file up, get it to somebody else, especially when you're just running huge organizations. Often these present juicy initial access vectors. So from my perspective and what we see at Huntress, threat actors aren't necessarily going after Move It, Clio, I was about to say ClickHouse. That's a completely different company, CentreStack, because they can get data. It's really just a way to get in, and arguably, and we'll talk about this. That's what we see with their post access tradecraft. They aren't trying to just get as much as they can from these file sharing solutions. That's just the stepping stone in.
Interesting. Thanks for that explanation. All right, Mr. Pico, over to you.
Well, first off, Andrew, good job working in serendipitous.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. It was
Yeah.
my word of the day. So I'm trying.
Yeah, it was pretty good. It was pretty close, pretty good use. So I'm going to give it to you. So, Dre, let's start with the beginning, April 11th, and exactly how this was uncovered.
Yeah, so this is, I think, is an exciting story. So we have a couple of detections that we have for sort of O days. Now, I want to be clear, this isn't us. It's nothing overly clever. We have these floating out there, and we look for these to be correlated because we want to put these detectors in conversation with each other, see what comes up. And we have dedicated people in our SOC who are just keeping their eye out for when any of these flag. Now, 97% of the time, it's a false positive. There's nothing interesting. What was super interesting on April 11th is we not only had these detectors fire, but at the same time, we had a malicious true positive report for what we didn't know at the time, but it was post-access tradecraft. And so one of our sort of senior threat hunters took a look and said, well, there's a story being told here. We just need to put it in order. So we took a look through, and that's when sort of you raise the siren at Huntress and the Avengers come running. So we got the John Hammonds, we had all our reverse engineers, kind of got into a room. And what we realized is we were seeing a story about this intrusion. The minute we realized that, it's as if the entire internet did as well, because we started seeing this pop up everywhere. So the story really became us validating that we were seeing post-access from CentreStack. Then it became, okay, well, can we recreate this? The recreation isn't so we can get a POC and throw it around to everybody and say, look how clever we are. It's actually to conjure detections, to conjure mitigations, and to help with hardening. And that's what John, and if you've read the blog, he's done a wonderful job. John Hammond is not just talented, he's also handsome. He did a great job at explaining to folks, here's how Huntress has uncovered this, here's what you should do next. From there, we then went and told as many people as we could. And it wasn't just the folks in our community. We tried to push this blog as far as we can with detections and mitigations. But a big part of this was working out how malicious is this? How worried should we be? We don't want to be the folks who cried wolf. But it was an exciting time. And John stayed up until ungodly hours, really routing this down. It was actually really inspiring to be part of.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's good to hear when you say that there sounds like there was pretty quickly so many tripwires. That means that people are starting to get aligned, right, with best practices in terms of detection. So that's really good news. So what makes this CVE so attractive, like from the bad guy standpoint, compared to other vulnerabilities, like some of the things that are low effort with it?
So what's cool about this, and it mirrors what we were just talking about with the other file sharing solutions. These are publicly accessible portals. You don't need to come up with very clever external perimeter traversals to be able to use these. These are designed for users in the public internet to use. Great, threat actors love that because they can just mass scan all day, all night looking for these things. And that's what they do, by the way. They poke and prod at all the doors and they're just trying to figure out what gets them in. And that's ideal for scanning and then mass exploitation. What's pain in the butt about this one is it's giving a remote code execution with just trivial payload delivery. There's hardly any barriers to entry. And that's because of the hard-coded secret. It's one of those ones where threat actors don't have to put much effort in. And once a POC is given, all they have to do is point and click. Compare that to what we would call high effort CVEs or high effort attacks. Those are more complicated. They involve various stages. I would arguably point to some of the exchange vulnerabilities and exploits a few years ago. Those started complex. By the time folks were done compiling POCs, those also became point and click. So I think CVEs sort of arguably, or attacks start high effort, become low effort. This one, however, is pretty low effort.
So does that mean like when they start low effort, that means it saves time, right? Like those vulnerabilities can get utilized. Like there's quicker time to value for bad actors.
Absolutely. And as well, it arguably democratizes attacks. So if there are complex CVEs or complex attacks, those are more for your advanced, either offensive security operators or just nation state actors. When a CVE and when an attack is easier to deploy, now you have any kid sitting in his parents' house able to also point and click and gain access. When things are lower effort, that usually also means the community has more awareness. Something being low effort doesn't always translate into the community should get worried about it, but we can talk about that when we talk about CVE scoring, because I have opinions on that as well.
Gotcha. So you mentioned something, they have like hard-coded cryptography keys. So why is this situation with hard-coded secrets? Why is it so why is it such a big problem in 2025?
That's a great question. I mean, the one answer to that is it's probably just not very good security practices during the development process. And I want to be clear, software developers aren't and probably shouldn't be the sole arbiters of security. There should be a good software life cycles with security as part of it, and that should be somebody's dedicated job. But what you've seen here is developers usually just hard code things for convenience. It's just easy. Also testing, and they can forget to change these things before they push it to production. And reiterating it again, we're all security-minded folks. A lot of things aren't designed for security. They're designed for functionality. They're not thinking about security hygiene. They're thinking about how do we make a thing work? And that's what we've observed here, that someone was more focused on how an application should work, as opposed to thinking about how security-minded that application should be.
Yeah, think how hard it is to change that culture. You know what I mean? The same way as MSPs, we're working to change our cultures because you're not thinking about security every time you're trying to help a customer in a specific area, right? That's maybe not be the first thing on your mind. Same thing when you're coding, right? And having a culture change is hard and it's expensive, right? There's a lot of things you have to do today in developing code, and there's a lot of old code. Most code, like almost all code, if you look at it as a percentage of it, is old code, right? So that's an issue. You observed attacks on around 120 endpoints across 7 organizations. Like, how quickly do you see these adversaries pivot once they become known? Can you talk about some of the tradecraft that they employ?
Yeah, so this is the really simultaneously exciting but also disappointing part from threat actors. Now, I find something quite hilarious when threat actors get access to really juicy exploits and POCs, sometimes even ODAs. They kind of do the same boring things. And I'll get into why I think they do this in a moment. But what we saw for this is what we kind of see for everything. We observe sort of, yes, they try to do some very basic lateral movement, but really they're just trying to consolidate their access. They're not yet trying to achieve an objective, whether that objective is ransomware, whether it's sort of some kind of industrial espionage and exfiltration. To consolidate their access, they're getting in remote access tools and they're making configuration changes. The reason why I think they're doing this is they're doing it at scale. These are just scripts. These are all automated. But the other thing, I think you have a bunch of, to be blunt, novices who are the operators behind these, who don't know what to do. They're like a dog chasing a bone. We usually see threat actors waste their own time by installing coin miners, sometimes called coinminer.exe. And it's quite hilarious seeing these really complex intrusions that end with coin miners. But what's really cool about this as well is threat actors sometimes will use external tools that they'll bring on to a machine, like Cobalt Strike. But what they usually do is use tools that are built in, or use legitimate tools to obviously illegitimate intentions. So PowerShell on every server, it's easier to just do something in PowerShell than it is to bring Cobalt Strike. But also Mesh Agent. Mesh Agent is a legitimate remote access tool. I imagine there are some sysadministrators who wouldn't blink twice at seeing that tool present in their network if they weren't too sure what remote access tools are legitimate and not.
Interesting. It's good. Phyllis, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Phyllis,
Go ahead.
can you just give us your thoughts and put this in chat? And that is, the whole secure by design, initiative, which got started under the Biden administration. Just seeing what you're seeing so far, like, does this go anywhere? And have you seen any teeth in it yet? I mean, kudos to you guys on the flip side about, putting in, your white paper on reasonable cybersecurity, which was phenomenal. But when it comes to secure by design, can you just give us, your just ad lib what you think, Phyllis, and where we're going to go here?
Yeah, sure. So just FYI, I saw that by Ann. As you all know, I can't chat. I can't put anything in the chat. So
Yep. It's just it's a by the way, talk about building code in Restream. That's a feature, right? That you can't
can't write anything in the chat. So yeah, sure. So for those of you who don't know, secure by design. So I'll just take a step back. For the past few years, the executive office has been trying to put the onus on software developers, right? You see that in national cybersecurity policy. You saw it in some EOs under Biden. SBOM is one of those, is kind of a result of some of that. Most recently, last year, CISA put out a secure by design document of which several nations signed off on, as well as some vendors. And it was like, here are best practices when you go and create software. And so the question is, will that turn into national policy? What is that? Right now, it is just a self-attestation. Now, many nations worldwide, the EU, and another nation, and the UK, are interested in secure by design, and everyone's kind of creating their version of secure by design based off of CISA's document, because many of those same nations signed off on that document. Now, the question is from us at CIS is, how measurable is this? Organizations are self-attesting, but what does that really mean at the end of the day? It's not like auditors may go there and so on and so forth. So conveniently, Andrew, this year we're going to create a paper on how to measure secure by design. It's unclear that we can have national policy at this point because of, all the churn that's going on right now. It doesn't seem like cybersecurity is a priority. And so what we want to do at CIS is help organizations understand, what does it mean to measure against secure by design versus we just sign up and say, yeah, we did it. But maybe as a consumer, maybe even as a vendor who's trying to implement best practices around secure by design practices, what is it that I can be doing in a proactive way? And perhaps, like I said, consumers, what it is that you can be asking for or rest assured that organizations are implementing. So we did a look at all the different kind of secure by design documents, BSIM, which you've mentioned before, and NIST SSDF. We have, and we've settled on NIST SSDF to look at. FYI, years ago, Microsoft had, secure development lifecycle written by and started at Microsoft by Steve Lipner. He's now over at SafeCode, and he's helping us with this. So a little bit of a long-winded answer. I think, to directly answer your question, it's unclear that there's going to be teeth in secure by design. However, everyone realizes it's important.
Yeah.
Right. And so what we want to do
not everyone.
Well, right. Right. You're right. You're right, Gary. Lots of us. So and so at CIS, we want to kind of, move that along, absent any kind of national policy.
It's kind of like right now, it's like the old, before CMMC 800-171, like, this is what you should do, right? Pinky swear we're doing it.
Mm-hmm.
You could do a whole show on software development chains and how that works and how that would even look, right? I mean, it's more complex than I think the people who write the regulations know at some time. But
yeah,
biggest thing of anything, Gary nailed it. How are you going to go back and refactor millions of lines of code that are being reused over and over and over again? Who's going to foot the bill for that?
Yeah, I mean, can I be honest? That development cycle, having built a SaaS software product and been involved with several others, I built my IT process twice, okay, in a pretty short amount of time. And it's one of the reasons why, I have a Kaseya logo under, True Methods, because it's ominous, Bob, to do it and stay competitive. And you have newer competitors come in, and you got to be focused on features and other things. There's just never a time 100%. To go back. Yeah.
Yep. I think we got to get realistic. I think that really would be a great call. What's realistic about that entire effort.
Mhm.
What's really realistic about it? And let's quit blowing smoke in everybody's eyes about how we can just put a magic rule up on the wall and in a frame and say, okay, everybody run off and do that. That's just not
Yeah.
realistic. So we
Yeah.
got to come up with something else.
I,
That's not going to
I
do that.
want to get us back on track, but I will say this. I know that there's already a tax. There's already a software tax because there's a decent percent of budgets now at every software company at scale, devoted to security. That used to be devoted to scalability, new features, innovation, and you can only pass on so much. So it really comes out of those other categories because you don't have a choice. There has to be a decent percentage of your budget now that's going that, besides what you always had with fixing bugs. And you start, that pie gets cut down more and more, and that's what slows down innovation.
Good stuff. All right.
We got off track a little bit. Let's get
Yeah.
back on track, fellas.
So Dre, when you look at the timeline of this exploitation, you can see it almost happens immediately after CISA added the CVE to its Kev database. So how fast is fast in vulnerability weaponization? And, what considering what happened to CVEs this week, what are your thoughts on everything?
What are your thoughts on everything, Phyllis? What an unfair question.
Yeah.
So
All of
I
it.
think
Tell me everything.
well, all of it, and in one sentence. No, so what's interesting is exploitation begins like nearly instantly. Just because something is put on a website and says, "Hey, we know about it now," threat actors may have had to jump on you for hours, days, weeks. It's also the importance of, yeah, sure, you want to patch and mitigate once something's known, exploited in the wild. What we see at Huntress, and maybe this is just the benefit we've got of our install base, you've kind of got, I'm going to split the IT world into two. You've got the FTSE sort of 1,000, so very wealthy companies, and then you've got kind of everyone else, right?
Mhm.
And Huntress, we're with everyone else. We see threat actors there a good couple hours, days, weeks, depends on what particular bit of malware or exploit, then the Fortune 1000 sees. Now, I have a hypothesis. That's where threat actors go to test, right? They're going to go to test in the smaller spaces, the smaller businesses, the medium businesses, before they go over to the bigger, juicier targets. So I think there's also that disparity of fast is fast, but it really depends. If you're a more juicy target, threat actors are going to be super quick, going to get in and cause more damage. If you're a tougher target, they're going to prod, they'll probably move on, right? Doesn't mean, by the way, that having a hardened external perimeter can completely stop attacks, but it's the point of it. The other thing we're thinking about is hasty exploitation. Great. You don't patch, things still get exploited years later. We're still seeing like exchange from 2021. We still sometimes at Huntress see folks join Huntress and we'll be like, hey, so this is still actively being attacked. Sometimes the patching isn't just going to be enough. Yes, you want to be quick to patch, but assume compromise. I can't tell you the number of times where folks patch, we see that there is underlying persistence that was not swept for. Huntress says, hey, so we're seeing this activity, it's probably stemmed from this. And they go, I patched that back in 2018. I patched that night. And we go, oh, we're really sorry you didn't sweep for persistence. I mean, even with the CentreStack, threat actors were making web configuration changes. So you may undo all of the mesh agent, all the powers, everything they did. But if you don't check your web config, the front door is still open. So there's the weaponization of something, but there's also that reciprocating, how are we responding as defenders and what are we doing? And I would say patching and then assuming compromise are two things that need to go hand in hand.
Yeah, and what you just said also backs, the data that the VDBIR last year said that, hey, you small mediums, you're getting exploited with the same attacks as large enterprises. So we're not going to separate you out as a different, population getting attacked by hackers. And so, just another data point for everyone, which is why here on this call, it's important to really pay attention to all the attacks that are going on. So I believe the blog mentioned PowerShell payloads and Mesh Central being dropped post-exploitation. So why do you think attackers are favoring these kinds of tactics?
Yes, no, it's an interesting one. So I think I said before, like they just do the same things over and over. I think part of this is automation. They just have these scripts ready to do it. And really, for this story, there are three tools that threat actors use. The first is Cobalt Strike, but that's quite boring and uninteresting because that is a threat actor or an offensive security bit of tooling that allows command and control and other functionality. But that gets flagged pretty quick. It's a pretty known bit of offensive security software. And you understand why threat actors want to use that. The real interesting story is, okay, why are they sticking to PowerShell? And why Mesh Agent of all the things to use? We'll start with PowerShell. Well, it's built in.
Mhm.
It's there waiting for you. I've read some blogs sometimes that talk about Windows hardening, and it says just uninstall PowerShell.
Right.
Don't do that. That sounds
Right.
terrible. You'll
Right.
never get any system administration done. And that's
Right.
the side of this, right? It's I wouldn't call PowerShell a lol bin living off the land binary itself, but it's built-in Windows functionality that IT folks use to get system administration done, threat actors use for their own gain. So it's built in, it's there. The other thing though with Mesh Agent, now we're seeing Mesh Agent used more and more and more. What I find fascinating about Mesh Agent is its simplicity. There are other remote access tools that require a little bit more of a careful choreography between client side, so the target, and the server side. Mesh Agent, super flexible, super dispensable. You can rename it. You can do all these things and it doesn't break. I think threat actors are using this because they just want a low barrier to entry when it comes to remote access tooling. Why? Because it's persistent, right? If you don't have the best inventory hygiene as a defender, you don't know how many remote access tools are actually used in your environment. And maybe you use multiple. Heck, maybe you even use Mesh Agent as one of your legitimate tools. Threat actors are also using it. And so that's a persistence, a remote persistence for them is gold dust. You can patch, you can mitigate. But if you didn't catch that, they've still got access to your network. And that's terrifying.
That is, that is. So for the non-techies on the call, can you explain why view state zero deserialization is such a dangerous attack vector in ASP.NET applications?
Yes. Well, explaining deserialization and serialization is always fun. So we'll do it the best way that I can. And someone in chat can tell me where I've missed something and I've been egregious. So it's worth talking about serialization first. What's
Well, we have different ideas of fun, first off.
fun? I'm boring though, Gary. So I know my idea of fun isn't everybody's. So serialization is just packaging stuff up, right? You just want to package stuff up, makes it easier to send. That's literally it. It's just you package stuff up, gets sent easier, and then it can be deserialized when it's received. So you've taken something complex, packaged it up, because you know it's going to be uncomplicated later. For view state, very specifically, to not overcomplicate it, it just helps you maintain knowledge between web pages, between requests. Fantastic. If it's not particularly secure, a threat actor can inject malicious code and package it up. And then when it's deserialized, that malicious code is executed. Essentially, threat actors are able to smuggle their malicious code into very legitimate web requests. That's terrible. That's bad. And what we saw was threat actors were able to use, and again, it's not unique to CentreStack. View state deserialization is across the ASP.NET sort of infrastructure. So I'm sure this hasn't been the only time it's used. And there are threat actor tooling that is designed to do this exact kind of serialization to deserialization attack. Why So Serial is one of those kind of tools. At risk of getting too technical under the premise of non-technical folks, essentially threat actors can smuggle stuff in, but serialization is ridiculously interesting and complex. I think John spent a good 3 hours just trying to make the serialized attack work when he was doing his POC. So it's an interesting attack, but it arguably allows a threat actor to do the same thing that they all want to do, gain access. So their goal isn't to serialize or deserialize for fun. They just want to get in.
Right. I mean, I would say serialization and deserialization has been around a while and is something that folks have been able to exploit for a while. But that was a very good explanation. Thank you.
Thank you. I was on the spot.
I know you talked about PowerShell and Mesh Central and even the serialization and deserialization. These are all things that exist because we need them to exist, right? And so what it is, and so it can very easily look quote unquote normal. So what are the warning signs or what indicators can MSP be looking for if something, to detect if something malicious is going on? So what is the quickest like smoke test that you would recommend?
Yes, so you want to have a look for any view state payloads or anything going on in the portal. So one of the problems with this, it will rely on you having, it's like a vicious cycle. You need to have some defensive monitoring to know that this is going on, to check. If you don't want to do all of that, Huntress will have a script that will tell you if it's free, just use it. Could tell you where you're vulnerable and things like that. If you're saying, okay, well, I want to know about this now, go and have a look for outbound connections that are unusual.
Mhm.
Anything to do with mesh agent, preferably, you can go and have a look for that. If you know that you don't use that in your environment, that's not good. You also want to go and review any PowerShell scripts and scheduled tasks. So PowerShell scripts in your scheduled tasks. You probably don't do that as a legitimate system administrator. You don't just have random PowerShell scripts. Actually, I was a sysadmin, so I definitely did have random PowerShell scripts in my scheduled tasks. But the unfortunate thing is, to really be ahead of these kind of attacks, you actually need to have a little bit more proactive defensive security. So locking things behind firewalls and VPNs where possible. So you preferably don't want to have file sharing solutions that are publicly accessible. But again, it's that convenience versus security. It's also
Right.
good inventory management. So knowing the remote access tools that you use and being able to have systems that alert you to say, hey, you only use ConnectWise Screen Connect. There's one agent in all of your networks that has Mesh Central. That's anomalous. And you want good application allow listing. So again, if their actors are bringing tools on, you want to make sure you're locking down where they can do these things. But that is all easier said than done. And again,
Right.
these things all come with costs. They're not always free. But yeah, and you can't go wrong with having a good security solution. I'm not here to tell you which one to go for. Go for the one that works for yourself. But essentially, paying somebody else to think about these things can sometimes just be the easier way to solve that problem.
Right. Right. Okay, over to you, Bob. Thanks, Dre.
Yeah, thank you. It's always interesting when everything we're talking about deserialization, and then you're right, Dre. Though I mean, I think all that's happening here is it's getting put into the evil as a service kind of SaaS platforms that these people are using. They're just reusing them over and over again, right? So I think you're exactly right on that front. Um, and I'm going to be talking about CVEs here, since this is pretty close to everyone's heart and soul, especially those of us that are practicing MSPs, where a lot of our MSSPs, where we're using vulnerability management as one of the services that we do, right? I mean, it really does pretty much hinge on having some sort of standard to manage by. So I'm curious, in this case, the one thing I've noticed over the last year and a half is how complex um, configurations have gotten for different elements of our ecosystem, right? So cloud services have highly complex configuration element to them, and then on top of that, right? Because I just got finished doing this. The reason this is very close to my heart, but AI in general, the complexities and of configuration of that particular aspect of information systems now takes on an even bigger sort of an aspect, because if you get that wrong, now they don't have to go file by file to try to find the stuff that's important. They can just ask your LLM that's parked on your network. If you're misconfigured, they can say, hey, just give me all the stuff I want to know, and here's a list of it. Send it back to me, and include a Starbucks coupon so that I can actually get some coffee later, and do all that and walk away from it, right, and go. So as it relates to that, how do you see that really evolving with the future of CVEs, right? I mean, because this is going to get it's going to get more complex, especially having spent a lot more time recently dealing with these AI factors. What do you see happening on the CVE front when it comes to these misconfigurations, and those being part of what CVEs indicate, and then how that's going to have to evolve over the next few years?
No, that's a fascinating one, because there's two sort of stories there. There's the high tech part of this, which yes is AI and it's cloud, but there's also the simpler but still complex part of this story. CVEs need to capture context beyond just the score, the CVSS score. Okay, they need to do that. There's all kinds of factors to take into account. Because arguably, something that has a score of 1 million, but it's only for a privilege escalation, don't worry about it. Like, no, don't worry about it, but that's fine. You need to think about exploitability in the wild. You need to think about like, how does this map out to threat actors' paths? So is this part of initial access? If so, hey, you actually really want to pay attention to that, and CVEs need to be able to call that out. So there's that simpler story of, can we just think of these things in choreography? But then there's, yes, the complicated part of, I don't think right now that as a vocabulary, CVEs and much to do with defense really can accommodate AI and cloud. I think we really struggle.
I would agree with you. I would agree with you. I mean, just because, and digging in with this, the number, because in some cases there are no elements or no aspects of some of these LLMs and or the what's running them, the operating system that's helped support them and everything. There's no facility for knowing what people are doing once they're inside of that particular engine, right? And if you can't really see that, you can log requests and prompts. But if someone's doing something naughty with that AI engine, and there's a lot that can be hidden, which I think is part of the problem that you're kind of illuminating right there, right? So I think it's going to take a lot more work. Personally, my opinion on the CVE process too, which may be unpopular, but I think us as an industry are going to have to take control of that. We're going to have to build something that spans political wills. Clearly, we see that now, and I think, in my opinion, we need to be thinking in terms of how can we make this an industry effort and not just depend on who we have been depending on that. But that's, again, personal opinion. So there's all the turbulence, right, with CISA and trying to figure out how the CVE program, the funding is going to work. What are some of your concerns as it relates to just the stability of CVEs as a global standard, which we have right now, but it would not take much to we have seen that you could pull the plugs out of the wall and tear stuff up in a really short amount of time. So how does that impact your opinion on what's the future of CVEs are as a standard?
Yeah. No, so I mean, we all saw the funding letter or lack thereof funding. We all probably had thoughts about the internal politics of it all. I, sitting a little bit over the pond, considered the geopolitics of this all, that there is an over-centralization. There is a dependency on essentially not just the United States, but like one federal contact and one maintainer, MITRE. So there's the geopolitics, and then there's the sort of internal politics. I couldn't possibly comment on the internal politics. But the geopolitical
I can't either, by the way, Dre, so it's okay.
Yes.
We're in the same boat.
But on this side of it, I think the EU, the UK, they definitely thought, oh, shoot, okay, well, we're centralizing. How can we decentralize? How can we share these things out? I can't comment on if that should be done or not, but having a more stable ecosystem for these things, having the industry, exactly as we said, like take control, own more of it, having good funding, good governance, it just builds that trust in. Because overnight you had folks sort of saying, the sky is falling, and maybe it could have. I don't know if the letter was a clever move to definitely secure more funding or not. I don't know. But it was definitely an eye-opener for some folks of what does a world where you can't, or it's more difficult to allocate CVEs look like. I think we've all gotten quite used to it. And I think there are a lot of things that we're going to struggle with if we continue to over-centralize. And I think decentralization is a good thing, but also having trust in a handful of maintainers and a handful of institutions is probably a good thing. But I don't know what it looks like in sort of 10, 20 years' time, what an ideal would look like.
Yeah, I understand. But I'm kind of with you. I think we're going to have to find a way that is not single sourced, but that has its own problems, as we all kind of know, right? So we'll have to figure that out as we go. What I do know is that, being, again, a practicing MSP, MSSP, but I'm interested in your opinion from your perspective, right? So what does it look like if you have a lapse? Let's just say so the lights went out at the CVE office, even if it's short-term lights going out. What are the broader security industry issues, fallout from that? What does that really start? How does that felt, right? How does it affect response? How does it affect vulnerability management? That sort of thing, in your opinion.
Yeah, so I had to think about this because, again, I read that funding letter and I thought, man, what's the biggest thing we're losing? I think we lose a vocabulary. Because I really tried to think, because CVEs, if you're a techie, you think of these things as, okay, the CVE is the label, but there's things underneath it that are involved with scripts and POCs and all those things. But there are other people in our industry. So you've got folks in GRC, you have the C-suite, and the language that we've trained everybody to use, CVEs, is exploitation. if you take that away, we've suddenly now lost a standard vocabulary to explain to somebody, hey, I need more budget. Why? Well, man, we had these exploits. So we've trained folks to be able to rely on CVEs and MITRE, and that's a good thing that we've got that training. But if you lose that, well, now you've lost that ability to speak that language. You've also lost the ability to explain and convey the urgency of something. When there's a CVE, you can kind of just click, send it over to someone and say, hey, man, we have to do something about this. When there isn't, or potentially wouldn't have been that, how do you explain to somebody how urgent this is?
Right.
They're going to Google something, they're going to come up with something very different than what you've explained it. So yeah, I think the loss of vocabulary is the single thing that I thought to myself of, this is irreplaceable. Because we can find other ways to coordinate with vendors and help highlight something that's worth patching and all those things. But the one thing that we lose is that vocabulary that we've helped train a whole industry on, of urgency.
Yeah, go ahead, Andrew.
But Phyllis, I have a question to you on this. You know, if you were looking at through the lens of the MSISAC, one, I'd love your opinion to this question, but does this impact threat sharing also, right? Oh, we're seeing these IOCs for said, you know, CVE. Like, this is a ripple effect. It's not just the vulnerability and its severity, isn't it? There's more to it.
Right. I mean, I think, you know, what Dre's talking about, that common vocabulary, you know, really affects everything and everybody. It's also this idea is there's a trusted source, right? When someone says this is a CVE and it's severe and whatever, it's being exploited, we all believe it because it's been validated by, in this case, MITRE, right? And so it allows everyone to threat share like the MSISAC based on CVEs. Additionally, the tail of that is the NVD. When it makes into the NVD, which it says, this is how you remediate. These are where the patches are. These are the versions of software that are affected. So it's also like that most important step of how can I defend against it? So the loss of a CVE is really, it just affects the whole entire ecosystem, right? The tools that everyone is relying on, all those tools, they all use CVEs to say, okay, here's this vulnerability. This is where you're vulnerable. Then they, you know, use the NVD. This is how you patch. This is what, you know, every software vendor who create, you know, those that are exploited and are subject to CVEs, every tool vendor that is relying on CVEs, and all those ISACs, not just MSISAC, all the different ISACs that rely on CVEs to do that information sharing, that threat advisory, threat intel information sharing across their membership, you know, it all relies on CVEs. And so it has great impact worldwide. And you know, that's why there was such a rumbling, and that's why the 180 was done so quickly.
So are you saying that if you knew even one thing about cybersecurity, you wouldn't have any defunding?
Is that a rhetorical question? Gary Pica and his rhetorical question.
But Phyllis, wouldn't it also have a ripple effect in essence also on like CIS and the framework and your framework? I mean, like, hey, this is how, you know, if we're talking about patching as an example and mitigating controls and things like that, you would have immediate appendix need right away. Like, how are you going to deal with this when you don't have the tooling and everything we've advised?
Right. So we talk about patching, we talk about using EDR, we talk about having a vulnerability management program, all those things. And while not explicitly written, and maybe even not explicitly thought about when creating the framework, what we all just kind of assumed, I think, was like, oh, we all know CVEs are a part of this life cycle, right? Excuse me. So if there is no kind of national standard or worldwide standard in which you can describe a vulnerability and perhaps rank them and rack and stack them, then maybe vulnerability management as a control looks way different.
I kind of like rank them and stank them. You should stick with that.
Rank them and stank them. Thank
Somehow that one's, I think that's closer to the truth, to be honest with you. Look, I'm with Gary. The point is that it shouldn't be touched, right? If you don't understand what you're messing with, don't touch it, especially when we have automation tools and we've got training. How many thousands of man hours have been put into this process, right? How many thousands of businesses have built their damn early warning systems around the fact that you have to have this common vocabulary and standard to work with. And the thought that someone would just pull the plug out on that without understanding it, again, you should never do that. Let's just leave it at that. That's not something that I would do. I would suggest other people not do it either. So, and we've really kind of talked about this a little bit, Dre, but the last thing I had was, having the ability to have some diversity in the source, right? Because that is if anything, what's been highlighted here is that that's a vulnerability, right? We've now got a CVE for the CVE system, is that we got a single source, right? And we've been shown that it can be threatened. So, what do you think? What's a good healthy redundancy look like if we're going to go after that?
No, I'm with you. I mean, the first thing to recognize is exactly what we talked about. CVE is kind of it's the backbone of a lot of other things, whether consciously or unconsciously. There's cascading impact if you just take that out of the equation, which, yes, nearly happened, but it didn't. Fantastic. There were some folks it's always on LinkedIn and Twitter, who said, no, this is great. This is a good thing because it means we can start to have more redundancy for vulnerability feeds and threat intel and community. And I think those things are wonderful. But I think a lot of those commentators are forgetting that the CV vocabulary, MITRE-ATT&CK, all these things allow folks to kind of not have to overthink. Someone's already done the thinking. If you're a sysadmin, you have a billion other things to think about. You don't want to have to now put your threat intel hat on, scroll through and figure out what is this threat intel feed trying to tell me because I don't have a CV anymore. I don't know. And I think a lot of commentators who say, we can democratize this are forgetting that we're security practitioners, we're security-minded folks. There are plenty of IT folks who rely on security frameworks to do this for them, with them. To imagine that these folks overnight can employ threat intel people, even pay for threat intel feeds. Let's not forget this. There are plenty of successful businesses who will sell you updating, hey, this is getting exploited. We don't sell that, but I'm sure it'd be useful. There's transparency and community participation, but at the end of the day, somebody has to curate this. And there has to be a very careful cultivation and choreography. Otherwise, what you end up with is folks just saying, hey, I'm glad that we all think it, but what should I do? I'm a practitioner, I'm a sysadmin. Do I need to patch now, tomorrow? How long can I leave this? I think having CVE gives us that common vocabulary to take it away. I mean, maybe there's a future where we have an ISO standard-like way of talking about things and vulnerabilities. That sounds great. Terrible to try and coordinate all the countries, but that would be ideal, right? That everyone could participate and it's very set and standardized. But for now, I think, yes, we're too reliant on CVE, but I don't think there's any second place alternative ready to step in.
Andrew, we're getting a couple more minutes. I have to jump off the call, but before I go, I just want to say, Dre, really good. You're a really good guest. Awesome job.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah, I'd like to have you back again.
I agree. Gareth, it was so good to see you back. And I know I'll see you next week.
I'll see you in Vegas.
Yeah, I'll see you in Vegas. Look forward to it. And we'll be reporting there. See you there. Dre, I'll just close by this. You are phenomenal. And, Phyllis, it makes me kind of chuckle about these comments of democratization and things. The reason I say that is, in 2016, when I met Aaron Chernin and the folks from Perch, one of their whole thesis was helping banks and healthcare with threat intel, because the biggest of the big had all of that capability. But down market, how would a small bank, deal with this, right? That was their whole thesis of Perch originally. Exactly. Right. And this whole, I'm so glad you brought it up, Dre, because so much is theory, right? Oh, well, these smaller companies that will have choice and this and that. But the way you brought home, they don't even have the bandwidth to do it today. Yeah. Right, Bob? Let alone
absolutely.
Exactly.
Now we're going to do away with these standards. So it's you know, I don't have the answer, but I'm really glad you articulated it that way, because it's a big deal. It would be a big mess. So, so anyway, but as Gary said, Dre, you were phenomenal. It was so good. I'd love to have you back on. You were a great guest, and really appreciate it. So
I'm super grateful. It's been a wonderful panel. You guys have been very kind as well. So I appreciate that.
not always. See you, fellas. See everybody. Thanks, Bob, as always.
Yep. See you
Great
later,
job.
guys.
See you, Jay. Take care.